Somewhere in western Armenia, not far from the Roman border, encamped the Sasanian royal army. King of Kings Narsa decided not to disband his army over the winter in preparation for the upcoming campaign against the Romans. The vast camp was abuzz as the locals came and went, trading their goods and crafts with the troops. As the morning wore on, 3 Armenian market gardeners carrying a carriage full of cabbages approached the gate, asking permission to enter and sell their wares. After a brief exchange, they were allowed inside. But these men were no cabbage traders. As the gates closed behind the strangers, the guards were unaware that 2 of the men were Armenian nobles, while the 3rd man was the Roman Emperor Galerius, and they had just infiltrated the Sasanian royal camp. And if you ever wanted to leave your mark on history, look no further than Call of War, a free online strategy game that gathers millions of players worldwide. Rewrite the course of World War II by taking on the role of one of the major powers and charting your course to conquest on vast, historically accurate maps utilizing complex in-game strategic elements. Call of War matches are epic and can last several weeks, hosting up to 100 players, where you can forge alliances, define your strategy, and build powerful armies to fight for world domination in a challenging PvP environment. And HistoryMarche viewers are getting a special gift. Click on the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is available only for 30 days. So click the link in the description, choose a country, and fight your way to victory in Call of War. By the late 3rd century, Rome went through decades of decline. Periods of drought, famine, floods, and the 20-year-long plague of Cyprian devastated the population, reducing the manpower of the army, and the perpetual power struggles between emperors, their rivals, and usurpers, all primarily concerned with scheming against each other, further weakened the empire internally and left the borders largely neglected. In the west, incursions across the Rhine and the Danube by the Franks, the Alemanni, and the Goths exploited and exacerbated the empire's instability. Worse, in the east rose a new superpower. Ardashir I, founder of the Sasanian Empire, and, more importantly, his son and successor Shapur I, dramatically contributed to the onset of the crisis of the 3rd century through military successes against Rome's eastern provinces. Shapur, perhaps the greatest of Sasanian King of Kings, pushed the border west, pulling Hatra into the Sasanian sphere of influence and wresting control over the Kingdom of Armenia. What followed were years of humiliation inflicted upon the Romans, as Shapur sacked the rich Roman provinces and countless large cities, destroyed several imperial armies, and killed or captured 2 Roman emperors, Gordian III in 244 AD and Valerian in 260 AD. Rome suffered massive financial and manpower drain, and the disastrous defeats undermined confidence in the emperors, provoking a slew of military rebellions and usurpations that eventually broke the empire into 3 rival regimes. The structural integrity of Rome's imperial machine fell apart, the frontier system crumbled, and the collapse of legitimacy saw usurper after usurper making their violent bids for power. However, as the plague slowly subsided in Europe and the Middle East, and the aging Shapur launched fewer and fewer campaigns in the last years of his reign, before dying in 270 AD, later Roman emperors were able to piece the empire back together in dramatic fashion, and managed to regain a firm foothold in the east, recognizing that subsequent Sasanian rulers couldn't match Shapur's brilliance and had to contend with rebellions of their own. By this time, the two empires needed respite after decades of war. And in 284, the Roman Imperial army was marching back home from Lower Mesopotamia. Not far from Nicomedia, in Bithynia, the weary troops were relieved to be away from the fighting, with even Emperor Numerian himself staying inside his carriage. But all was not well. Although the emperor was apparently resting, no one has seen or spoken to him for days, until a foul smell of death came from the imperial carriage. The alarmed troops attempted to draw Numerian's attention, but it was clear that the emperor had mysteriously died. Strangely, his father and predecessor, Emperor Carus, also died in mysterious circumstances just months prior, supposedly after being fatally struck by lightning while campaigning in Lower Mesopotamia, though it's possible he was killed by the Sasanian troops. Now, the dead emperor's generals and tribunes elected a new emperor. The army of the East gathered and unanimously saluted Diocles as their new Augustus, and he accepted the purple imperial vestments. Not long after, he changed his name to a more Latin-sounding Diocletian. After overthrowing the previous emperor's brother Carinus in the west, the new emperor appointed his friend and general Maximian as the new Western emperor. The two appointed their own junior emperors, Constantius in the west and Galerius in the east. This arrangement, which modern scholars call the Tetrarchy, the rule of four, helped to clarify the succession in an age rife with usurpation, ensuring that there was an emperor present on every major frontier. Diocletian proved an exceptional administrator, dismantling the Augustan illusion, revamping civil and military services, reorganizing the provinces, and developing the empire's bureaucracy. Unprecedented effort was dedicated to reorganizing and strengthening the empire's eastern provinces, creating a defense-in-depth system, as well as dealing with internal rebellions. A comprehensive tax reform addressed inequality, increased efficiency, and covered the growing bureaucratic and military spending. On the diplomatic level, Diocletian skillfully negotiated a treaty with Rome's eastern neighbor that divided Armenia between the two empires and saw Tiridates III, a member of the old Parthian ruling elite who were enemies of the Sasanians, installed on the throne in western Armenia as a Roman client. And, for the next few years, peace endured on the Roman-Sasanian border. Meanwhile, the Sasanian King of Kings, Bahram II, the grandson of Shapur, faced massive rebellions started by members of his family and various religious leaders. Nevertheless, he did well to balance relations with the Romans and keep his empire together. So, despite giving up Western Armenia, Bahram used the peace with Diocletian to consolidate and prepare for a conflict against Rome that was surely coming. Upon his death, he was succeeded by his son, Bahram III. However, there still lived the youngest son of Shapur I, Narsa, who until now ruled as the Persian great king of Armenia. Needless to say, he was none too pleased that he lost hold over Western Armenia because of Bahram II's dealings with Diocletian. In addition, he grew tired of being passed over for the throne in favor of other members of the Sasanian dynasty, believing that his brother Bahram I, the former ruler and Shapur's third son, and his descendants had excluded him from his rightful place as King of Kings. 4 months into the reign of Bahram III, his great-uncle Narsa challenged him, and, with the support of the eastern satraps and a powerful faction of the nobility, marched on the capital, where he forced the abdication of Bahram, becoming the first Sasanian King of Kings to not ascend the throne as a crown prince. Roman emperors and Tiridates of Armenia sent their congratulations. But Narsa did not have peace on his mind. Wishing to revive the glory days of his father, the new King of Kings prepared for war. 3 years after ascending the throne, he made his move, marching his army into Roman-held Upper Mesopotamia, catching them completely unprepared. The emperor in the vicinity was Diocletian's Caesar Galerius. Faced with Narsa's surprise invasion, the Caesar led a small army to Upper Mesopotamia and sent urgent messages to Diocletian for reinforcements. Galerius met the King of Kings twice, fighting a delaying action and suffering only minor losses as he retreated. But in the third encounter, his much smaller force received the worst of it, suffering heavy losses before retreating back towards Syria. Considering the limited manpower available to him, Galerius's campaign might have seemed reckless, but in fact it was a bold and considered action that served to blunt the Sasanian offensive, preventing Narsa from entering Syria just in time for Diocletian to arrive with an army. Aware that Narsa possessed cavalry vastly superior in quality and numbers, the Romans dug in and began reorganizing. Diocletian would remain to keep watch over Syria, while Galerius went back to gather reinforcements in the Balkans. He was perhaps the most capable commander Diocletian had at his disposal, having led armies with success in several theatres over the years. It is said that he was a very large and imposing figure who kept bears as pets, and according to contemporary sources, he matched his bears in both size and ferocity. Galerius collected various units, including a contingent of Gothic mercenaries, whose cavalry would help to balance the playing field against elite Sasanian cataphracts. On the march back east, he also raised new recruits to complement his veterans and endeavored to have them trained as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Narsa invaded western Armenia, expelling Tiridates and the pro-Roman nobility. Forced to wait for Galerius to arrive with additional troops, Diocletian couldn't act against the much larger Sasanian host. The situation worsened in autumn of 297, when a usurper, Domitius, exploited the uncertainty to seize power in Egypt and stake his claim to the empire. When Galerius rejoined the emperor, it was immediately clear that the situation in Egypt needed attention fast, as Domitius directly threatened the grain supply to the rest of Rome. Diocletian rushed to Alexandria to besiege the rebel, leaving Galerius to continue the war alone with a part of the army. Meanwhile, as cold weather approached, Narsa and the royal army were consolidating the Sasanian hold on western Armenia. Establishing winter quarters in Armenia ensured that the Romans could not march on Ctesiphon, as this would expose their communications from the north, which would, in effect, force Galerius to either stay put or march through the mountainous Armenia once the snow melted. But, despite the onset of winter, Galerius audaciously led his men north into the Cappadocian highlands with an army of 25,000. Tiridates joined along the way with his cataphracts that were of comparable quality to those of the Sasanians. At Satala, the Roman army rallied and restocked on provisions before continuing east towards Armenia with haste. The decision to march in the bitter winter weather again showed Galerius's willingness to take risks, as he wanted to surprise Narsa with a forced winter march. The small force he had under his command shows that he didn't have time to complete preparations, and he may have realized that, With Diocletian taking the main army to Egypt, he might not even have enough time to build up his forces before spring. And if he remained outnumbered once the snow melts, it would have been difficult to deal with the superior Sasanian cavalry. In his mind, now was the time to strike, while he could utilize his veteran infantry in the rugged terrain when the enemy least expected him. Local scouts soon returned, bringing reports that the Sasanian camp is just to the east. Next morning, a most extraordinary thing took place. The ever-bold Galerius walked up to the Sasanian camp, accompanied by 2 Armenian nobles. The 3 tried to gain entry, disguised as market gardeners, intending to sell cabbage. The ruse worked, and, looking like 3 peasants, they were now free to have a look around the enclosure. The Sasanian camp was like a large caravan. Narsa brought with him possibly upwards of 40,000 troops, although there are no reliable sources for the size of his army. In tow were the palace and army baggage, the main tents, the royal treasury, his entire harem of women, mobile royal quarters of his queen of queens and the rest of his household, as well as a multitude of elephants and enough supplies to last around 6 months until summer. As they moved through the camp, offering to sell their cabbages, Galerius spotted a weak section of the outer palisade that was fairly close to the woods, and noted that Narsa's inner royal enclosure was vulnerable. The Caesar now had a plan, and the 3 men casually started walking back towards the gate, trying not to arouse suspicion. The story of Galerius's entry into the Sasanian camp would have been considered unlikely had it not been mentioned by 4 different sources, all claiming that the Caesar personally reconnoitred the royal camp of Narsa. Whatever the case, Galerius spotted weaknesses in the Sasanian enclosure, and by nightfall he was on his way back to his troops. Just before dawn, while most of the Sasanian camp was asleep and unaware of what was to come, Roman troops crept out of the woods, crawling towards the weak point in the wall. Halfway to the camp, Galerius gave the signal. As ladders went up on the walls, Sasanian guards sounded the alarm and rushed to drive back the enemy. But the better prepared Romans held fast, maintaining their position on the narrow palisade walkway, protecting the troops on the ground who worked to tear down a section of the wooden palisade. Even as they breached the wall, the negligently unconcerned and unsuspecting Sasanian troops were slow to react. Torn from their sleep, a handful of officers managed to form their units and rushed upon the Romans, but the defense of the breach lacked proper organization. Galerius's men formed their own defensive line on each side of the breach, with experienced Armenian and Gothic troops covering the advance of the Roman infantry, who rushed forward, directly targeting the royal enclosure. Elite Sasanian troops stood fast, protecting Narsa's compound, but most were too surprised and disheveled to combat the Roman breakthrough. More and more of Galerius's troops poured into the breach, and soon they forced their way among the tents of the Sasanian ruling elite. In the chaos, the few defenders who entered the fray were poorly supported, and by the time news spread across the camp about the attack, inside the royal enclosure, the Sasanian nobility and their retinues were already surrendering. Such was the speed of the attack that even Narsa and his personal guards failed to react. The King of Kings managed to flee with his life just in time, supposedly suffering a light wound during the fighting. But the vast Sasanian royal treasury, provisions, equipment, and at least 13 elephants were captured. Worse, the great king's wives, sisters, and daughters, including his Queen of Queens, fell captive. As the day wore on, the Romans exacted revenge for past humiliations, sparing not one enemy soldier, whilst the women and children found in the camp were taken into captivity. In the aftermath of the battle, Galerius continued the invasion of Persia for much of 298, striking deep into the interior, before advancing on Ctesiphon from the east, and then marching up into Upper Mesopotamia, recapturing the Roman fortress of Nisibis. The humiliated Narsa kept his distance from the Caesar, failing to contend the invasion, and had positioned himself further east. Meanwhile, Diocletian was on his way back from Egypt, having crushed the usurpation after a grueling 8-month-long siege of Alexandria, and in early 299 he joined Galerius to outline the terms of peace for the Sasanians. Large expanses of territory were ceded by Narsa to Rome and Armenia, and the wealth taken by the victorious Romans was so vast that it achieved legendary status, with its transport back to Rome posing significant logistical challenges. The total defeat at Satala and the manner in which it occurred would remain a sore point for the Sasanians for decades to come, with the ruling elite complaining that Armenia and northern Mesopotamia were dishonorably torn from Persia by use of a trick. Galerius's victory was a bright moment for the Romans after decades of crisis and humiliation. His victory in the east arguably remained unmatched until the achievements of Heraclius in the 7th century. The capture of Narsa's wives, sisters, and daughters became the equivalent of the capture of prior Roman emperors by the Persians, and was celebrated by posterity in the Roman Empire. Galerius went on to win major wars against the tribes north of the Danube, resulting in massive deportations and resettlement of the population, mostly into Roman Pannonia, to increase manpower and tax revenue, in some cases causing a complete annihilation of ancient peoples. In 305, Galerius was named emperor in the east when the elderly Diocletian abdicated and retired to his palace on the Dalmatian coast. A young man later reported that he saw the glorious ruins of Babylon while serving as one of Galerius's tribunes. This man undoubtedly learned much from the warrior emperor while in his service, and would one day become a great military leader in his own right. His name was Constantine, but that is a story for another video. Credit goes to our awesome patrons who make videos like this one possible. Consider joining them to support our work. You can also support us by subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell button to get notified when our new videos are released. And as always, thank you for watching.